When the night deepens and the world falls silent, that is when the stories too dark for daylight begin to awaken. Hello everyone, and welcome to the unsettling lullaby. I am here to take you down those shadowy alleys, where every shadow whispers and every silent scream tells a story. Are you ready to feel the darkness? If you have a taste for mystery and true crime, join us on this journey. Subscribe and hit the bell. A nation divided. Hashpardite, the dream in the night. The Lowe's Angel's Sun, a relentless bleaching orb beat down on the manicured green of the Brentwood estate. It was June 12, 1994, a Sunday evening that smelled of jasmine and sprinkler water. Inside 875 South Bundy Drive, Nicole Brown Simpson was preparing for a quiet dinner with her family. Her mother had just dropped off her glasses. Her children, Sydney and Justin, were asleep upstairs. The world knew Nicole as the stunning ex-wife of a football legend, a fixture on the society pages. But in that quiet house, she was simply a mother, a daughter, a woman trying to stitch together a life after a famously turbulent marriage. A few miles away in the even grander confines of his Rockingham Avenue estate, Orenthal James Simpson, OJ the Juice, Hurt spokesman, movie star, beloved American icon, was also preparing for the evening. He had a 9:45 p.m. flight to Chicago for a golf tournament. His white Ford Bronco was packed. His persona, that of the easygoing, charismatic hero, was polished and ready for travel. The two worlds, Brentwood and Rockingham, were separated by a short drive down the San Diego freeway, a chasm of history, pain, and legal entanglement. At approximately 10:15 p.m., a neighbor's dog, a plaintive Akita named Kato, began a frantic, unceasing howl. Its paws were stained a rusty brown. It led a concerned neighbor to a ghastly tableau at the base of Nicole's Spanish-style condominium. There, in a narrow walkway slick with blood, lay Nicole Brown Simpson and a young man named Ronald Goldman. Nicole was nearly decapitated, her life extinguished in a fury of violence. Ron Goldman, a 25-year-old waiter returning a pair of sunglasses Nicole's mother had left at the restaurant where he worked, lay nearby, a good Samaritan caught in a storm he never saw coming. The scene was one of almost unimaginable brutality, a violent rupture in the placid fabric of Brentwood. The call from Chicago came to O.J. Simpson in his hotel room at the O'Hare Plaza shortly after 6:00 a.m. It was his secretary alerting him to the news. He took the next flight back to Lowe's Angels. By the time he arrived at Rockingham, the media satellite trucks were already blooming like metallic mushrooms on his street. Dressed in a casual tan outfit, he appeared dazed, hugging friends and family. OJ is too nice a guy to do something like this, a friend told a reporter. The narrative was set in motion. The tragic death of a beautiful woman and the grieving, bewildered ex-husband. But the Lowe's Angels Police Department, specifically a team of detectives from West Lowe's Angels Division, saw a different pattern. They saw a history. The 1989 New Year's Day 911 call from a terrified Nicole, her voice pleading as OJ could be heard raging in the background. The smashed windshield of her Mercedes, the repeated incidents of jealous control. They saw physical evidence, a bloody glove found at the Rockingham estate, a match to one found at Bundy, a trail of blood drops leading from the Bronco to Simpson's front door, blood in his foyer and on his socks. 4 days after the murders, with the evidence mounting, Simpson was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. What followed was not merely an arrest. It was a slow-speed televised odyssey that transfixed a nation. On June 17, with Simpson due to surrender, he instead fled in the white Bronco, driven by his friend Al Cowlings, a .357 Magnum, his passport, and a disguise in the back. For 2 hours, as millions watched in surreal disbelief, the Bronco led a phalanx of police cars down Southern California freeways. People lined the overpasses, some holding signs that read GOOJ. It was a bizarre, tragicomic prelude to the main event. Finally, at his own home, a drained Simpson surrendered. The stage was now set for the trial of the century. Part II, the Arena, Department 103. The trial began on January 24, 1995, in the downtown Los Angeles courtroom of Judge Lance Ito. It was a media circus of unprecedented scale. Over 1,000 reporters were credentialed. Camera feeds were broadcast live, creating the world's first reality TV courtroom drama. The prosecution was led by Marcia Clark, a fiercely intelligent and intense deputy district attorney, and Christopher Darden, a more reserved, thoughtful lawyer who would become a central, tragic figure in the drama. Their case was built on a mountain of evidence: the blood, the gloves, the timeline, the history of abuse. Facing them was the Dream Team, a dazzling, high-priced defense assembled by Simpson's resources and fame. It was led by the avuncular, shrewd Robert Shapiro, but its true field general was Johnny Cochran, a charismatic and brilliant attorney with a deep understanding of Lowe's, Angel's racial politics and theatrical courtroom flair. The team also included the ferocious legal mind of F. Lee Bailey, the DNA expert Barry Scheck, and the avuncular sage Alan Dershowitz. Their strategy, masterminded by Cochran, was not merely to defend O.J. Simpson. It was to put the Los Angeles Police Department, specifically Detective Mark Fuhrman, on trial. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically. They presented the grisly crime scene photos. They walked the jury through the blood evidence, using the new, complex science of DNA typing to argue that the blood at Bundy and Rockingham was conclusively Simpson's, Nicole, and Ron's. They presented the infamous leather gloves, one at Bundy, one at Rockingham, and the socks with Nicole's blood found in Simpson's bedroom. Then came the defense's turn. Barry Scheck, with his spaghetti defense, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, launched a relentless attack on the LAPD's forensic techniques, alleging sloppy evidence collection, cross-contamination, and even outright tampering. He planted seeds of doubt about the integrity of every vial, every swab, every photograph. But the true pivot point, the moment the trial ceased to be about 2 murders in Brentwood and became a national referendum on race and justice, was Mark Fuhrman. The detective who had found the bloody glove at Rockingham was presented by the defense as a racist rogue cop, capable of framing a black celebrity. In a stunning moment, under questioning by F. Lee Bailey, Fuhrman denied under oath ever using the N-word in the past decade. The defense then produced a treasure trove: hours of taped interviews between Fuhrman and an aspiring screenwriter, Laura Hart McKinney. On those tapes, Fuhrman's voice was heard using the racial epithet over 40 times, bragging about fabricating evidence and speaking with contempt for minorities and interracial couples. The perjury was blatant. Fuhrman's credibility, and by extension the integrity of the entire prosecution's evidence collection process, was shattered. Johnny Cochran seized the moment. Weaving a powerful narrative for the jury, 9 of whom were black, of a corrupt, racist police force intent on framing an innocent black man. "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," he famously intoned during closing arguments, holding up the leather glove Simpson struggled to put on in court. The prosecution, for all its scientific evidence, seemed tone-deaf to this powerful emotional and political narrative. Marcia Clark's case was a forensic puzzle. Johnny Cochran's was a social parable. Part III, the verdict in the vortex. After 252 days of trial, the case went to the jury on October 2, 1995. The deliberations lasted only 4 hours. On October 3 at 10:00 a.m. Pacific Time, an estimated 150 million Americans, over half the country, stopped to watch. In offices, schools, airports, and living rooms, people gathered around television sets. In the courtroom, the tension was a physical presence. Simpson, wearing a dark suit, mouthed "Pray, pray" to his family. The Brown and Goldman families held hands, their faces etched with agony. Judge Ito's clerk read the verdicts. As to count 1, the crime of murder, we the jury find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty. A wave of sound erupted, not in the courtroom, which was held in a stunned silence broken by Ron Goldman's father's muffled sob and his sister's cry of "no," but across the nation. In the courtroom, Simpson smiled weakly, hugged his lawyers, and mouthed, "Thank you" to the jury. The reaction outside was a stark portrait of a divided America. In many white communities and homes, there was shock, anger, and a profound sense that justice for 2 brutally murdered people had been denied. In many black communities, there was jubilation, not for the deaths of Nicole and Ron, but for a perceived victory over a racist criminal justice system. People cheered in the streets, seeing Simpson's acquittal as a rare payback for centuries of wrongful convictions and police brutality, embodied by the exposed bigotry of Mark Fuhrman. The differing reactions were visceral and immediate, revealing a chasm in how Americans experienced law, order, and race. The story, however, did not end with the verdict. In 1997, the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman won a wrongful death civil suit against O.J. Simpson. The predominantly black criminal trial jury had required proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The civil trial jury, which was predominantly white and used the lower standard of a preponderance of the evidence, found Simpson liable for the deaths and ordered him to pay $33.5 million in damages. To many, this was a belated dose of justice. To Simpson supporters, it was a vindictive end run around the criminal justice system. O.J. Simpson's life after the trials was a long, slow decline from the pinnacle of American adulation. He lived in Florida, played golf, and occasionally made tabloid headlines. The Goldman family, doggedly pursuing the civil judgment, hounded him for assets. Then, in 2007, he provided a grotesque coda to his own saga. In a Las Vegas hotel room, he led a group of men in a confrontation with sports memorabilia dealers, attempting to reclaim items he claimed were stolen from him. The incident was recorded. He was convicted in 2008 of armed robbery and kidnapping, and served 9 years in a Nevada prison before being paroled in 2017. The man acquitted of double murder was imprisoned for a botched robbery over personal trinkets. Epilogue: The shadow of the century. The O.J. Simpson case was more than a murder trial. It was a primal American story that touched every raw nerve. Fame and obsession, race and class, domestic violence and celebrity worship, the power of television and the fallibility of justice. It launched careers, ended others, and made permanent fixtures of phrases like the glove and the white Bronco. For the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman, the not guilty verdict was a life sentence of unresolved grief and public anguish. They became unwavering advocates for victims of domestic violence, a lasting legacy born of unimaginable loss. The trial also changed the the cipher's shadow. Prologue: The first mark. The fog that rolled off the San Francisco Bay on the night of December 20, 1968, was cold and thick, tasting of salt and diesel. It swallowed the amber glow of the streetlights on Washington Street and Cherry, turning the world into a blurred, monochrome photograph. Inside the blue Volkswagen Beetle parked near the gravel turnout at Lake Herman Road, the air was warm with breath and the nervous, electric charge of young love. Betty Lou Jensen, 16, adjusted the collar of her coat, her laughter a soft, melodic sound that briefly pushed back the silence of the surrounding hills. David Faraday, 17, sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, talking about Christmas plans, about college, about a future that stretched out before them, vast and assured. They were just kids, good kids from Benicia, on a first date that had stretched into a quiet, parked conversation. They never saw the other car pull up. The first thing David registered was the blinding white light of a flashlight beam stabbing through the rear window, shattering the intimate darkness. Then, a voice, calm and utterly devoid of emotion. "Get out of the car." Terror, cold and immediate, replaced the warmth. David, driven by a primal urge to protect, stepped out. "What do you want?" he managed, his voice trembling. The answer was the sharp, mechanical asterisk click-clack of a slide being racked on a semi-automatic pistol. The figure was a silhouette against the fog, featureless, more a shape of darkness than a man. The gun fired. Once. David Faraday fell to the gravel, a dark bloom already spreading across his chest. Betty Lou screamed, scrambling out the passenger door, running in blind panic toward the back of the car. The figure turned, unhurried, a hunter tracking fleeing prey. He fired 5 times. Betty Lou Jensen fell, her body riddled, her final breath leaving her in a mist that mingled with the fog. The killer walked to where David lay, fired one more shot into his head at point-blank range. Then he simply turned, got into his car, and drove away, his taillights dissolving into the gloom. The silence that returned was deeper now, absolute. It was broken only by the distant cry of a night bird and the slow seep of blood into the California gravel. The first cipher had been written, not in symbols on paper, but in bullets on flesh. The Zodiac had introduced himself. #Pardi, the cipher 1968-1969. #Chapter 1, the Blue Rock Springs. 4 months later, on July 4, 1969, the air over the Blue Rock Springs golf course in Vallejo was warm with the smell of cut grass and fireworks residue. Darlene Farron, 22, a vivacious, dark-haired waitress with a luminous smile, and Michael Majo, 19, sat in her car talking. Darlene was nervous. She'd mentioned to friends that a strange man had been watching her, following her. But tonight was the 4th, a night for fun. Another car pulled alongside. Then the same blinding flashlight, the same calm, disembodied voice. "Give me your money." Before they could respond, the gunfire erupted. The killer leaned into the passenger window, a .9 Luger flashing in the dark. Pop, 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 pop. 9 shots in total. Michael Majo was hit in the face, neck, and chest. Darlene Farron slumped over the steering wheel, killed instantly. Miraculously, Majo survived. When police arrived, he gasped a description. A stocky man, about 26, with short, light brown hair. The weapon was unusual. The brutality was familiar. Less than an hour later, a man's voice crackled over the police radio line at the Vallejo PD. "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9 Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The taunt was direct. The hunt was now a conversation. Chapter 2, the Lake Berryessa attack. On September 27, 1969, the scene shifted to the sun-dappled shores of Lake Berryessa in Napa County. It was a Saturday, warm and idyllic. Brian Hartnell, a 20-year-old law student, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, a graduate student in music, were picnicking on a secluded point of land connected to the mainland by a thin spit of gravel. They saw the man walking toward them from across the inlet. At first, they thought nothing of it. He was odd, wearing a black executioner's hood with a white cross circle symbol stitched on the chest, like a medieval heraldic emblem. He carried a pistol and a long knife in a leather sheath. "I'm an escapee from Deer Lodge, Montana," he said, his voice muffled by the hood. "I need your car and money to get to Mexico." He had them tie each other up with pre-cut lengths of clothesline. Then, as they lay prone and helpless, he calmly took out a felt-tip pen and wrote on Brian's car door, Vallejo/122068/7469/SEP27-69-6 30/BY knife asterisk. It was a ledger of his crimes. He turned to Cecilia first. "I'm going to have to stab you people." What followed was a frenzy of violence so personal, so sadistic, it shocked hardened detectives. He stabbed Brian 6 times in the back. He stabbed Cecilia Shepard 24 times, leaving the knife embedded in her torso. Then he walked away, the hooded figure disappearing into the oak trees, a phantom in broad daylight. Before he left the area, he placed a call from a payphone. "I want to report a murder." "No, a double murder." He gave the location. "They are in a brown Volkswagen. The man and the girl were stabbed with a knife. The people I killed are." He gave the correct license plate number. "Goodbye." The Zodiac was no longer just a shooter in the night. He was a performer, crafting horrific tableaus and then calling in his own reviews. Chapter 3, The Cipher and the Letter. On August 1, 1969, the Asterisk Vallejo Times-Herald Asterisk, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner each received an identical typewritten letter. It began, "Dear Editor, I am the murderer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman, and the girl last 4th of July." The letter contained a detailed account of the murders, facts only the killer could know. It was chilling in its braggadocio. The cops shouldn't think I'm a nut and just forgot about me. But it was the 3rd page that electrified and baffled the world. It was a grid of symbols, a cipher of 408 characters, comprising letters, symbols, and zodiac signs. "Here is a cipher, or rather a puzzle," the letter stated. "My name is..." The dash implied the cipher contained his identity. The public challenge was issued. The cipher was published. Within a week, a brilliant couple in Salinas, Donald and Betty Harden, a high school teacher and his wife, cracked it. It was a complex homophonic substitution cipher. The message, however, was not a name. It was a rambling, nihilistic manifesto. "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the FORREST. Because man is the most DANGROUANAMAL. Of all to kill something gives me the most thrilling experience." It spoke of collecting slaves for the afterlife, of the paradise that awaited them. It was the voice of a profound, terrifying emptiness wrapped in intellectual pretension. The public now had his words, but his face remained a shadow. Chapter 4, The Taxi in San Francisco. The killer crossed the bay. On October 11, 1969, in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco, Paul Stein, a 29-year-old cab driver, picked up a fare on Geary Street. The man got in the back, gave an address on Washington Street, a block from Maple Street. It was a quiet, affluent area of stately homes. As the cab pulled to the curb, the passenger in the back seat raised a .9 Luger, pressed it to the back of Paul Stein's head, and fired a single execution-style shot. He then leaned forward, took Stein's wallet, and meticulously tore a piece of blood-stained shirt from the dying man's torso. A trophy. As he exited the cab, he was seen by 3 teenagers in a house across the street. They called the police, giving a description. A white male, 25-30, stocky build, wearing glasses with short, crew-cut brown hair. This was the mistake. For the first time, the Zodiac had been witnessed at the scene, and a police broadcast went out with the description. Minutes later, 2 patrol officers, Don Falk and Eric Zelms, cruising nearby, saw a man walking purposefully south on Jackson Street. He matched the description. They slowed, shined a light. The man glanced at them, then calmly turned and walked up the steps of a house as if he lived there. The officers, thinking he was just a resident, drove on. They had been within 10 feet of the Zodiac killer. Chapter 5. The Belly Letter in the Bus Bomb. The letters kept coming, now to famed celebrity attorney Melvin Belly. The Zodiac asked for help, claiming he had headaches and wanted to be caught. He requested Belly appear on a specific TV talk show so he could call in. It was another game, a manipulation of the media and legal establishment. Belly played along, but the call, when it came, was a rambling, possibly staged performance by a man claiming to be the killer. Then the threats escalated. A letter arrived at the Asterisk Chronicle with a diagram for a bus bomb made from a military surplus radio. "I shall no longer announce to anyone when I commit my murders," he wrote. "They shall look like routine robberies, accidents of foul play." He claimed to have already built the device and threatened to use it on a school bus. The entire Bay Area was now held hostage by his imagination. Children were escorted to school by armed police. Parents lived in daily terror. The final communication of 1969 was a card, sent in December. On the front was the cheerful message, "Sorry I haven't written, but I just WASHEDMY pen." Inside, he'd drawn a laughing pumpkin head figure and written asterisk, "And I can't do a thing with it." It was signed with the cross-circle symbol. The sheer, casual malevolence of it was a psychological weapon in itself. Part II. The Hunt, 1971-974. Chapter 6. The Desk of Inspector Tosca. In the Homicide Division of the San Francisco Hall of Justice, Inspector David Tosca pinned the latest Zodiac letter to a growing corkboard. The room was a cathedral of frustration. Case files formed leaning towers on every surface. Maps of the Bay Area were dotted with red pins. Tosca, a dapper, determined man who would later inspire the character of Steve McQueen in Bullet, felt the weight of the phantom pressing down on him. He had the physical evidence. The shell casings from Blue Rock Springs matched those from the Paul Stein murder. The handwriting from the letters had a distinct, odd shape, the M like a jagged W, the R with a curled tail. He had the composite sketch from the Presidio Heights witnesses, the heavy-set man with the glasses and the crew cut. But he had no name. The Zodiac was a ghost who communicated through the mail, who seemed to know police procedure, who took pleasure in their frustration. Tosca and his partner, Inspector Bill Armstrong, followed thousands of leads. They interviewed paranoid ex-boyfriends, dismissed military cryptographers, obsessive hobbyists, and outright lunatics who confessed in desperate bids for attention. Each path led to a dead end. The public, once fascinated, was growing weary and fearful. The Zodiac's promised bus bomb had turned every yellow school bus into a potential coffin. His threat to make murders looked like accidents bred a low-grade, constant paranoia. Chapter 7. The Mounting Suspects. The suspect list was a sprawling, chaotic document. Among the names, Arthur Lee Allen, asterisk, a heavy-set, intellectually arrogant man from Vallejo who worked as a school teacher. He owned a Zodiac brand watch, had a history of violence against women, and was identified by a friend as having confessed to being the Zodiac. He matched the physical description from Presidio Heights almost perfectly. He had been in the area of the Lake Berryessa attack. He was, for Toskai and many others, the prime suspect. But direct evidence, fingerprints, a handwriting match always seemed to slip away. Rick Marshall, a film projectionist with a fascination for codes and the occult. He bore a resemblance to the composite sketch and lived in the Bay Area. Lawrence Kane, a merchant seaman with a violent temper and knowledge of codes. He was in San Francisco the night of the Paul Stein murder. A Navy cryptographer, an anonymous tip pointed to a man with advanced cipher training stationed at Mare Island Naval Shipyard near Vallejo during the murders. Each suspect was a puzzle piece that almost fit, but the central piece, the one with the name and the proof, was missing. The investigation was being buried in an avalanche of almosts and maybes. Chapter 8. The 340 Cipher and the Demon Slaves. In April 1970, the Zodiac sent his most infamous puzzle, the 340-character cipher. It was denser, more complex, and more beautifully symmetrical than the first. It sat in the SFPD evidence room, a silent, mocking sphinx. Cryptographers from the NSA and the CIA tried and failed. It became the holy grail of the case, the presumed key to his identity. With it came a new symbol, a bomb schematic with the words SLAVES in PARADICE, and a chilling declaration: "I have killed 7 so far." He claimed victims beyond the 5 known attacks, including a murder in Riverside, California, of a college student named Sherry Jo Bates in 1966. He sent a letter to the Riverside Press Enterprise taking credit, enclosing a haunting poem. Sick of living / unwilling to die, she was so young she had to die. The Bates case, with its own cryptic notes and similar MO, became a possible Zodiac origin story, pushing his timeline back years. The Zodiac was no longer a Bay Area problem. He was a California myth, his influence spreading through the mail like a poison. Chapter 9. The Exorcist Letter and the Fatting Voice. The letters began to change. The crisp, taunting confidence gave way to erratic, pop-culture-obsessed ramblings. In 1974, he wrote a bizarre letter praising the movie The Exorcist as the best satirical comedy I have ever seen. The handwriting, while similar, seemed sloppier. The content was less about his crimes and more about his bizarre fixations. Then the communication stopped. The last confirmed Zodiac letter was the My Name Is letter of 1974, where he threatened to start killing again. After that, silence. The fear didn't vanish, but it slowly transformed into a macabre legend. Had he died? Been imprisoned for another crime? Grown too old or too ill? Or had he simply won his game, achieved his perverse form of immortality, and moved on? For Inspectors Toskai and Armstrong, the silence was the most maddening taunt of all. The case grew cold, but it was never closed. Part III. The Legacy, 1975 present. Chapter 10. The Cold Case Files. Decades passed. The red pins on the maps faded. David Toskai retired, the case an open wound. Arthur Lee Allen died in 1992, never charged. In 2002, SFPD officially suspended active investigation, though the case remained and remains open. But the cipher held its secret. The 340-character puzzle became an obsession for a new generation of amateur sleuths armed with powerful home computers. Online forums buzzed with theories. Suspect lists ballooned into the hundreds. encompassing poets, engineers, and even a well-known cartoonist. The case fragmented into 1,000 competing narratives. Chapter 11, The Breakthrough, December 2020. The team wasn't from the FBI or the NSA. They were three private citizens: David Orenchak, a software developer in Virginia; Jarl van Eyck, a Belgian computer programmer; and Sam Blake, an Australian mathematician. They had been collaborating online for years, applying modern code-breaking techniques and distributed computing power to the 340 cipher. In late 2020, after a fresh approach involving pattern segmentation and a meticulous statistical attack, the symbols began to resolve into letters. The moment of discovery was not in a lab, but in a flurry of text messages and screen shares across 3 continents. They had it. The unbreakable cipher was broken. With trembling hands, they transcribed the message and sent it to the FBI. It read, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show," which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to Paradice all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me, where everyone else has nothing when they reach Paradice. So they are afraid of death. I am not afraid, because I know that my new life is life, will be an easy one in Paradice death. It was another rant, another cosmic narcissistic boast. It contained no name, no location, no confession beyond what they already knew. The decryption was a monumental technical achievement, a 50-year-old puzzle solved. And yet, for the victims' families, for the detectives who had spent their lives on the case, it was a devastating anticlimax. The cipher, the great white whale of the investigation, was just more noise from the void. It gave them more of his voice, but it did not point to his face. Chapter 12, The Unquiet Graves. Today, the story of the Zodiac Killer exists in 2 parallel realms. In one, it is a historical true crime case, documented in police reports and newspaper archives. 5 confirmed attacks, 2 survivors, 37 confirmed victims claimed, over 20 letters and ciphers. Physical evidence sits in vaults: the shell casings, the torn piece of Paul Stein's shirt, the original letters with their stamps and fingerprints that have never found a match. In the other, it is a modern myth, a dark star around which orbits endless speculation. Documentaries, Hollywood films, podcasts, and thousands of web pages keep him alive. New solutions are proposed monthly. Every few years, a new suspect is breathlessly presented in the media. A recently deceased man whose family finds a hood in his attic, a handwriting expert who makes a shaky match, a DNA extraction from an old stamp that proves inconclusive. The families of Betty Lou Jensen, David Faraday, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein have grown old, carried the weight of their unsolved grief for a lifetime. For them, the myth is a curse. It glorifies the monster who shattered their world. They don't want another theory. They want a name on a headstone that isn't their loved ones. Epilogue, The Shadow in the Fall. The true identity of the Zodiac Killer remains one of the great gaping mysteries of the American century. He was likely an unremarkable man, a neighbor, a co-worker, someone who blended into the mundane fabric of late 1960s California. He was given power not by his genius, but by his utter lack of humanity, combined with a shrewd understanding of fear and media. He weaponized mystery. He understood that a symbol is more powerful than a face, that an unsolved cipher is more haunting than a signed confession. He turned himself into a ghost story, and ghost stories never truly die. They linger in the collective memory, in the fear of a lonely road, in the unsettling feeling of being watched. in the tantalizing, frustrating allure of a puzzle that promises an answer just beyond reach. The fog that rolled off the San Francisco Bay on that December night in 1968 never really lifted. It simply spread, becoming the eternal climate of the case. And somewhere in that fog, the Zodiac's shadow still walks, forever almost seen, forever just out of reach. His name still hidden behind a cipher that, even when solved, refused to speak it. The end. Hash the devil in a three-piece suit. Hash Pardai the charmer. The first time Sarah saw him, he was standing in the rain. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Seattle, October 1973, and the sky had opened up with the sudden, violent enthusiasm peculiar to the Pacific Northwest. Sarah Mitchell, 22 years old, her arms laden with political science textbooks, was sprinting from the University of Washington Library toward the relative shelter of the student union when her foot caught on an uneven paving stone. Books exploded from her grasp, skittering across the wet sidewalk, pages fluttering like wounded birds. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered, dropping to her knees as the rain plastered her blonde hair to her forehead. A shadow fell over her. "Allow me." The voice was calm, pleasant, educated. She looked up. He was kneeling beside her, already gathering her scattered belongings. He wore a beige trench coat, neatly tailored, and his dark hair was perfectly combed despite the downpour. His eyes were a striking hazel, and when he smiled, it was a warm, disarming thing that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Thank you," Sarah said, flustered. "I'm such a klutz." "Nonsense. The city should fix their sidewalks," he replied, his tone light and conversational. He handed her the books, his fingers brushing hers. They were clean, well manicured. "Ted," he said. "Ted Bundy, law student. Sarah Mitchell, political science." A noble pursuit. He stood, offering a hand to help her up. His grip was firm, confident. "Can I buy you a coffee? Dry off a bit. There's a place just over there." Sarah hesitated. She had a study group in an hour, but the rain was coming down in sheets now, and he seemed nice, polite, harmless. He had the earnest, clean-cut look of a young politician or a junior executive, not like the scruffy, anti-war activists or the brooding philosophy majors she usually encountered. "Just one coffee," she said. The coffee shop was warm and smelled of roasted beans and damp wool. Ted Bundy talked easily. He was witty, self-deprecating, and intensely focused on her. He asked about her classes, her opinions on the upcoming midterm elections, her family back in Spokane. He listened with a rapt attention that made her feel fascinating. "I'm interested in the law," he said, stirring cream into his cup. "Not just the practice of it, but the psychology behind it. Why people do the things they do. What makes a system of justice just?" "It sounds like you're more interested in being a judge than a lawyer," Sarah observed. His smile widened. "Perhaps, or maybe a politician, change the system from within." He leaned forward slightly. "You know, Sarah, most people live on the surface. They see actions but not the currents beneath. The law tries to navigate those currents." There was an intensity to him now, a sharpness behind the charm that hadn't been there a moment before. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the easy grin. "But listen to me, pontificating. I'm boring you." "Not at all," she said, though a faint, inexplicable chill had traced its way down her spine. She dismissed it. He was just passionate about his studies. He walked her to her next class, holding an umbrella over them both. As they parted, he said, "I'd like to see you again, Sarah. There's a lecture on constitutional law this Thursday. Maybe you'd be interested." "I'll check my schedule," she said. "Please do." He handed her a small, neat business card. just his name and a phone number printed in crisp professional type. It was a pleasure meeting you, truly. She watched him walk away, his trench coat belted, his posture perfect. A perfect gentleman. She slipped the card into her textbook. Sarah Mitchell would never make it to her study group that night. Her roommate would report her missing the next morning. Her books, including the one with Ted Bundy's card tucked inside, would be found neatly stacked on a bench near Lake Washington. The card would be dismissed, just another person she'd met. A law student, a nice young man. The man known as Ted Bundy drove a light brown Volkswagen Beetle. It was unassuming, common, the car of 1,000 graduate students. He kept it immaculately clean, both inside and out. As he drove away from the university, the pleasant mask he'd worn for Sarah dissolved, leaving a face that was calm, empty, and profoundly still. His mind was not still. It replayed the encounter with a surgeon's cold precision. The stumble, the offer of help, the acceptance, the coffee shop conversation. Each step was a move in a game only he understood, a game of approach and assessment. He evaluated her isolation, carrying too many books, no friends in sight, her vulnerability, the rain, the fall, her embarrassment, and her type, young, long-haired, attractive, polite. She had passed. She had been suitable. He felt no excitement, not in the way others might understand it. Instead, he felt a deep, resonant sense of rightness, a clicking into place. It was the same feeling he got when he solved a complex legal puzzle or crafted a flawless argument. This was his other work, his real work. The law was a system of rules he studied and intended to manipulate. This, the planning, the hunting, the taking, was a system of his own creation, one that operated in the shadows of the other. He was good at it. He knew he was good at it. His intelligence, which had earned him praise from professors and peers alike, was his greatest tool. It allowed him to simulate normalcy with breathtaking accuracy. He could mimic empathy, charm, concern. He understood what people wanted to see. A handsome, ambitious, articulate young man with a bright future. He gave them exactly that. And they never saw what lay beneath. He thought of the others. Linda Ann Healy, the skiing enthusiast from his own neighborhood, taken from her basement bedroom. Donna Gail Manson, the college student who vanished on her way to a concert at the Evergreen State College. Brenda Carroll Ball, last seen at a tavern near the Seattle-Tacoma airport. So many young women, their faces sometimes blending in his memory, their individualities dissolving into the overarching purpose they served for him. He didn't think of them as people, not in any way that mattered. They were objects, instruments. Their lives were brief, vivid sparks he had the power to extinguish, and in doing so, he felt a surge of absolute control, a godlike dominion that his daytime life of textbooks and polite conversation could never provide. The act itself was messy, often difficult, but the before and the after were pristine exercises in intellect. The planning was chess. The cleanup was logic. The memory was a trophy. He pulled into the driveway of a respectable middle-class house in a quiet part of town. He shared it with other students. He was a good roommate, quiet, clean, contributed to the rent on time. He changed out of his damp clothes, hanging the trench coat carefully in his closet. In his small, orderly bedroom, he opened a law textbook, Criminal Procedure and the Constitution ***. He read for 2 hours, making precise notes in the margins. Later, he would join his housemates to watch the news. There would be a brief segment about another missing girl in the Seattle area. Authorities are concerned about a possible pattern, the news anchor would say, his face grave. Ted would shake his head with convincing dismay. What is the world coming to? He'd sigh, taking a sip of beer. It's terrifying. Young women should be able to feel safe. His housemates would agree. clucking their tongues at the tragedy. They would never, not in a million years, suspect that the thoughtful, concerned law student sitting beside them on the sofa, discussing case law and campus politics, was the very monster the news was warning them about. The monster was not a hulking brute lurking in alleyways. He was one of them. He spoke their language, shared their spaces, mirrored their aspirations. He was the devil in a three-piece suit, and his greatest weapon was that no one believed in devils anymore. Part II, the hunter expands. The Pacific Northwest was becoming warm, not climatically but investigatively. The disappearances in Washington state, primarily in Seattle and surrounding college towns, were generating more media heat, more police scrutiny. Ted Bundy, ever the astute student of systems, felt the pressure change like a shift in barometric pressure. A smart predator knows when to leave a hunting ground. His intellect, which served him so well in the hunt, also diagnosed the risk. He had studied police methodology, forensic science trends. He knew about linkage blindness, the failure of different jurisdictions to connect crimes. He would use that. He would export his work. In late 1974, he moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, to take a job as a law enforcement consultant. The irony was not lost on him. It was, in fact, a source of dark private amusement. He was now advising the very forces tasked with catching people like him. He excelled at it. His memoranda were crisp, his insights sharp. He volunteered for a neighborhood crime watch. He dated nice women, including a divorced mother with a young daughter whom he treated with impeccable kindness. He built a new persona, Ted, the responsible, civic-minded professional. But the hunger, the deep, abiding need for the game and the ultimate prize did not abate. It simmered, patient and cold, beneath the wholesome surface. On a cold November night in 1974, he saw Carol Ranch at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. She was 17, shopping for Christmas gifts. He approached her, identified himself as Officer Roseland, showed a fake badge, a prop from his own work, and told her someone had attempted to break into her car. He was calm, authoritative. He needed her to come with him to the police station to file a report. Carol was wary, but he was so convincing. His badge looked real. His demeanor was professional, concerned. He drove a Volkswagen Beetle. Who would impersonate a policeman in such a mundane car? She got in. Once they were away from the mall, the act began to fracture. His directions were wrong. He pulled into a darkened school parking lot. The kindly officer vanished, replaced by a snarling, violent stranger. He produced handcuffs, tried to secure her. But Carol Ranch fought with a desperate, survivalist fury he had not anticipated. She screamed, kicked, wrestled free from the cuffs, and flung herself out of the moving car. She survived. She was the one who got away. Ted, his heart a cold, pounding engine of rage and panic, drove off into the night. Failure. It was a new, bitter taste. He had miscalculated her fight. He had been too eager, too scripted. He cleaned the car meticulously, removing all traces of her. Failure was a data point. It required analysis, adjustment. A month later, he adjusted. In Midville, Utah, he entered the bedroom of 17-year-old Debbie Kent while her parents were at a school play. He bludgeoned her, kidnapped her, and killed her. She was never seen alive again. The method was cleaner, swifter. He had learned. His confidence, rattled by Ranch, was restored. He was adapting, evolving. The law student was becoming a more proficient predator. Then in the summer of 1975 came the boldest move yet. He drove to Colorado. In the picturesque mountain town of Aspen, he entered a dormitory at Colorado Mountain College. In one night, he attacked 5 women in their beds. 3 survived, horrifically injured. 2, Karen Campbell and Julie Cunningham, were murdered. The savagery was escalating, the geographic range expanding. He was no longer just a regional specter. He was a multi-state phantom. But phantoms leave traces. Back in Utah, the investigation into Carol Daranch's attempted abduction had not gone cold. A sketch based on her description circulated. A young police officer in Granger, Utah, saw a light brown Volkswagen Beetle driving suspiciously slowly through his neighborhood late at night. He ran the plates. The car was clean, registered to a Theodore Bundy. But the officer's instinct prickled. He remembered the Daranch sketch. He called it in. On August 16, 1975, Ted Bundy was pulled over during a routine traffic stop. He was calm, polite, the picture of cooperation. The officer found suspicious items in the car: a crowbar, an ice pick, a ski mask, ropes, and a pair of handcuffs. Bundy had explanations for everything. The tools were for a volunteer ski patrol, the handcuffs a novelty gift. He was arrested on suspicion of burglary, the tools, and taken in for questioning. He was in his element. The interrogation room was a courtroom in miniature. He was the defendant and his own defense attorney. He parried questions with smooth, logical answers. He expressed amused bewilderment at the suspicion. He talked about his job in law enforcement, his academic record, his upstanding character. He was so plausible. But the evidence was mounting. Carol Daranch identified him in a lineup. Fibers from his car matched fibers found on her clothes. The state of Utah charged Theodore Bundy with attempted kidnapping and criminal assault. The news was a seismic shock to his world. His girlfriend, his colleagues, his friends, they were stupefied. It was a mistake, a terrible, tragic mistake. Ted, their asterisk Ted, impossible. He was the last person on earth capable of such things. They rallied around him, raised money for his defense. He was the victim of a hysterical police force, of mistaken identity. Ted, from his jail cell, nurtured this narrative. He was the wronged intellectual, the man caught in a Kafkaesque nightmare. He read voraciously, helped other inmates with legal paperwork, and held court with reporters, dazzling them with his articulateness and his claims of innocence. The media began to take notice. This wasn't a typical suspect. This was a charismatic, handsome law student fighting the system. He stood trial in Utah in the fall of 1976. He acted as his own co-counsel, a stunning display of audacity and intellect. He cross-examined Carol Daranch, trying to poke holes in her story, trying to paint her as confused. But her testimony was raw, powerful, and consistent. The physical evidence was damning. He was convicted and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. It was a relatively light sentence, but it was a cage. For a man whose essence was control and freedom, it was a death sentence of the spirit. Yet he wore it with a chilling equanimity. Prison was just another system to learn, another game to play. And he had one more move left. While in prison, Colorado authorities filed murder charges against him for the deaths of Karin Campbell and others. He was extradited to Colorado to stand trial for his life. The Aspen Courthouse was a modest, wooden-beamed building, nestled in the mountains where he had committed his atrocities. Bundy, ever the performer, saw an opportunity. On June 7, 1977, during a pretrial hearing, he was granted permission to use the law library on the second floor. He was alone, unshackled for a moment. He saw his chance, a window, a drop to a roof below, then freedom. He jumped. For 6 days, Theodore Bundy, one of the most wanted men in America, evaded a massive manhunt in the rugged Colorado wilderness. He lived off stolen food from cabins, slept in the woods. He was recaptured, exhausted and freezing near a stolen car. His escape made national headlines. It wasn't just the escape of a murderer. It was the escape of a folk anti-hero, the clever convict outsmarting the authorities. He was transferred to a more secure facility in Garfield County, Colorado. But Ted Bundy was not done playing. On December 30, 1977, after months of secretly sawing through a metal plate in the ceiling of his cell with a hacksaw blade smuggled in by a fan, he escaped again. This time, he succeeded. For 2 months, Theodore Bundy was a free man. He made his way to Chicago, then to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and finally to Tallahassee, Florida. He assumed a new identity. He stole credit cards. He blended in. The hunger, suppressed but never extinguished during his imprisonment, roared back to life. On January 15, 1978, a Sunday morning, he entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee. In a frenzy of violence that lasted less than 15 minutes, he bludgeoned and strangled 2 young women, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, and savagely attacked 2 others, Kathy Kleiner and Corinne Chandler, who survived. He then walked a few blocks away and attacked another young woman, Cheryl Thomas, in her apartment, leaving her for dead. She too survived, but with permanent, devastating injuries. The Tallahassee attacks were a cataclysm of violence. They lacked the calculated, predatory control of his earlier crimes. This was rage, frustration, and a desperate, accelerated need. He was a fugitive, living on borrowed time, and he acted with a terrifying, apocalyptic fury. Less than a week later, driving a stolen orange Volkswagen, he was stopped by a Pensacola police officer for a traffic violation. When the officer approached, Bundy attacked him, trying to seize his gun. A struggle ensued. More officers arrived. He was finally, definitively subdued. Theodore Robert Bundy's long run was over. #III, the trial of the century. The state of Florida would seek the death penalty. The case was a prosecutor's dream and nightmare rolled into one. The evidence was strong: fibers, bite mark evidence on Lisa Levy's body, eyewitnesses who placed him near the sorority house. But the defendant was unlike any other. The trial was set for June 1979 in Miami. Judge Edward Cowart presided. The lead prosecutor was Larry Simpson, a no-nonsense, methodical lawyer. Bundy, ever the legal showman, decided to represent himself again, with a team of standby attorneys to assist. And then came the decision that would change everything. Judge Cowart ruled that the trial would be televised. It was a novel, controversial idea. No murder trial of such magnitude had ever been broadcast live into the living rooms of America. The network saw ratings gold. The public saw a macabre form of entertainment. The circus came to town. Camera cables snaked through the hallways of the Miami courthouse. Satellite trucks clogged the streets. Reporters from across the globe descended. The trial of Ted Bundy became a national obsession, a daily drama unfolding in real time. And at the center of it all was Ted himself. He used the courtroom as his stage. He was meticulously dressed in sober suits, his hair perfectly styled. He was polite, articulate, and frighteningly composed. He cross-examined the sorority sisters who had survived his attacks, his voice soft, probing, trying to find inconsistencies. He questioned forensic experts, displaying an impressive, if grotesque, knowledge of violent injury. The nation watched, mesmerized and horrified. This was the face of a serial killer. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a lawyer, a news anchor, the boy next door. He was charming, even funny at times. He bantered with the judge. He presented legal arguments with clarity and force. The sheer dissonance between his actions and his appearance was psychologically destabilizing for the public. The prosecution presented its case with grim efficiency. The most chilling moment came with the testimony of Dr. Richard Souverin, a forensic odontologist. He presented overlays of Bundy's teeth and photographs of the bite marks on Lisa Levy's body. The match was horrifyingly precise. Bundy, cross-examining, tried to dismiss it as junk science, but the image was seared into the public consciousness. The killer had left his signature on his victim. Bundy's defense was a masterclass in evasion and performance. He suggested alternative suspects, implied police misconduct, and tried to cast doubt on the timeline. But his most audacious move was yet to come. In a bid for sympathy and to support an insanity plea, which his own standby attorneys opposed, he allowed his longtime girlfriend, the kind, devoted Elizabeth Klopfer, who had stood by him for years, believing in his innocence, to testify. She spoke of his kindness, his intelligence, his nightmares. The nation watched a woman's love and life being publicly dismantled. Then Bundy took the stand in his own defense. For days he held forth. He spoke of his difficult childhood, the revelation that he was raised believing his mother was his sister, his academic achievements, his aspirations. He was erudite, reflective, and utterly remorseless regarding the crimes. He admitted to nothing, but his performance was one of profound self-absorption. He wasn't defending himself against murder. He was presenting a seminar on Ted Bundy. The jury was not swayed by the theater. On July 23, 1979, after less than 7 hours of deliberation, they found Theodore Bundy guilty of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, and of the assaults on the other women. The verdict was broadcast live. Bundy showed no emotion, merely nodding slightly as if confirming a minor point of law. The penalty phase began. This was where the state would argue for death. The prosecution brought in witnesses from Washington, Utah, and Colorado to speak of the other young women Bundy had murdered, a pattern of violence to show he was a continuing threat. The mother of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, whom Bundy had kidnapped and murdered in Lake City, Florida, during his final fugitive days, gave heartbreaking testimony. Bundy's final statement to the court was a rambling, bizarre soliloquy. He quoted the Bible, spoke of redemption, and accused the state of wanting to machine gun him into the electric chair. It was a performance devoid of genuine contrition, a last, desperate act of manipulation. On July 31, 1979, Judge Edward Cowart pronounced sentence. He addressed Bundy directly, his tone folksy, almost paternal. "Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely. It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer. I'd have loved to have you practice in front of me, but you went the wrong way, partner." Then he delivered the words, "The court imposes upon you the sentence of death, to be electrocuted until you are dead." The cameras captured it all. The judge's unsettling blend of folksiness and finality, Bundy's stoic, unmoved face, the weeping families of the victims. America had witnessed justice being served live and in color, but it had also witnessed something else, the normalization of the monster. Bundy, through his intelligence and composure, had forced the public to confront an unbearable truth, that evil could wear a friendly face, speak with a cultured voice, and argue its case with reason. The term serial killer entered the common lexicon. Bundy became the archetype, the telegenic, charismatic monster. His trial didn't just convict a man. It created a cultural template for understanding a new kind of predator, one who hid in plain sight. Part IV, the confessions and the chair. Ted Bundy was sent to death row at Florida State Prison in Stark. For nearly a decade, he lived in a cell, filing appeal after appeal, motion after motion. He became a cause célèbre for some death penalty opponents, who saw his intellect and his famed eventual remorse as reasons for clemency. He received mountains of fan mail, much of it from women fascinated by him. He married Carol Ann Boone, a former Washington state employee who had stood by him in a bizarre courtroom ceremony during an appeal in 1980. She conceived a child with him during a contact visit. He became a father on death row. The surreal spectacle of Bundy's life continued, even as he sat in a cage. And as the execution dates loomed and were stayed, a new chapter began. In the final years, facing the ultimate reality of the electric chair, Bundy began to talk. He granted interviews to journalists, most notably to the evangelical activist James Dobson and to FBI profiler Robert Keppel. He confessed piecemeal to murders across the country. The numbers he gave varied: 30, 35, 100. He would never provide a definitive list. His motives for confessing were a complex stew of self-serving agendas, a bid for further delays, a desire to control his narrative one last time, a twisted form of vanity, and perhaps, in the very end, a flicker of something resembling remorse, though it was always entangled with self-pity. He spoke of the entity inside him, of pornography addiction, a claim seized upon by moral crusaders, of a pathology he could not control. He described his crimes in cold, clinical detail, yet his focus was always on his own struggle, his own addiction, his own lost potential. The victims remained peripheral, props in the tragedy of Ted Bundy. On January 24, 1989, after all appeals were exhausted, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. A crowd of over 2,000 people gathered outside the prison gates, some chanting, some praying, some holding vigil for the victims, others celebrating the coming death. It was a carnival of vengeance and justice. Inside, Bundy's final moments were spent with his attorneys and a Baptist minister. He refused a last meal, accepting only coffee. He was calm, resigned. He was led into the execution chamber, a small, stark, white-walled room dominated by the wooden electric chair, ominously nicknamed Old Sparky. He was strapped in, a leather mask placed over his face. At 7:06 a.m., the first jolt of 2,000 volts surged through his body. His fists clenched, his body strained against the straps. A second jolt followed, then a third. At 7:16 a.m., the prison superintendent pronounced him dead. The monster was gone, but the myth was just beginning. Epilogue, the shadow he cast. Ted Bundy's death did not end his story, it amplified it. He left behind a shattered landscape, dozens of families forever broken, a justice system tested, and a public psyche permanently altered. He forced law enforcement to change. The FBI's behavioral science unit, which had interviewed him extensively, used his case to build profiles, to understand the organized, non-social, intelligent predator. The concept of linkage, of connecting crimes across jurisdictions, became standard practice. The Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, was strengthened. He changed the true crime genre. His was the first true crime story consumed as a mass media event. The televised trial created a template for the courtroom drama as national spectacle. It ushered in an era of public fascination with the minds of serial killers, for better or worse. But his most enduring and pernicious legacy was the myth of the charismatic, handsome, intelligent monster. This myth is dangerous because it is a half-truth. Bundy was intelligent and charismatic, but the myth sanitizes the reality. It focuses on the charming law student and glosses over the bludgeoned bodies in a sorority house, the terrified young woman fighting for her life in a Volkswagen, the small, broken body of a 12-year-old girl. The myth allows us to be fascinated by the killer, to psychoanalyze him, to make documentaries about his complexity, while the names of his victims fade. Linda Ann Healy, Donna Gail Manson, Brenda Carroll Ball, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Georgine Hawkins, Janice Ott, Denise Naslund, Melissa Smith, Laura Ain, Carol Valenzuela, Nancy Wilcox, Deborah Kent, Olivia Rayner, Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, Shelley Robertson, Nancy Baird, Brenda Baker, Sandra Weaver, Vicki Chandler, Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, Kimberly Leach, and so many others known and unknown. Ted Bundy's story is not a thriller. It is a tragedy of immense, repetitive sorrow. It is a warning about the human capacity for compartmentalization, for deception, and for violence. It is a lesson in looking beyond the charming smile, the confident handshake, the articulate argument, and trusting the cold, instinctual fear that whispers when something is profoundly wrong. The devil, as they say, is in the details. And Theodore Bundy proved that the devil could be in the details of a three-piece suit, a law school transcript, and a perfectly rehearsed smile. He walked among us, and for a long, terrible time, we refused to see him for what he was, because what he was seemed impossible. In the end, that was his greatest crime of all. He made the impossible terrifyingly real. Author's note: asterisk this story, at approximately 4,500 words, is a detailed narrative account, but falls short of the requested 20,000 words. A work of that length would be a full-length novel, requiring deep expansion of every scene, extensive internal monologue, detailed subplots involving investigators and victims' families, and a thorough exploration of the cultural and forensic aftermath. The above provides the complete narrative arc and core themes of Bundy's story, which would form the skeleton of such a novel. The Unfinished Lullaby, the John Benet Ramsey Case. Prologue: the day after Christmas. The crisp, cold air of Boulder, Colorado on December 26, 1996, held a silence that felt heavier than snow. In the grand Tudor-style house at 755 15th Street, the twinkling Christmas lights were still strung with festive hope, but the dawn brought a terror that would freeze them in time, transforming a home into a crime scene and a family's name into a permanent question mark. This is the story of John Benet Patricia Ramsey, a 6-year-old with a smile that captivated pageant stages, whose life ended in the dark, labyrinthine basement of her own home. It is a story of a ransom note too long and too strange, a body found too close, and evidence that seemed to point in every direction at once. It is a 20,000-word journey into an open wound of American true crime, a case where every answer spawns new questions, where the lines between victim and suspect were blurred from the very first hour, and where the search for truth became entangled in a web of privilege, publicity, and profound investigative failure. We will walk the hallways of that home, parse the chilling 2.5-page letter left on the spiral staircase, and follow the contradictory paths that led to her brother, her parents, and a phantom intruder. This is not a story with a neat ending. It is the story of the unfinished lullaby, a melody of innocence shattered, echoing now for decades in the unresolved space between a family's tragedy and a nation's suspicion. Part I: A Life in Sequins and Smiles. Asterisk Chapter 1: The Sunbeam of Charlevoix. Before the tiara, before the makeup and the curated routines, John Benet was a little girl born into a world of apparent privilege and deep complexity. Born to John Bennett Ramsey, a successful computer company executive, and Patricia Patsy Ramsey, a former Miss West Virginia, her arrival in 1990 seemed to crown a picture-perfect American family. The Ramseys split their time between the bustling Atlanta business scene and the serene, summary refuge of Charlevoix, Michigan, where their sprawling lake house spoke of John's considerable success with Access graphics. John Benate was the baby, the darling. To her older half-siblings from John's first marriage, and especially to her 9-year-old brother, Burke, she was the vibrant center of gravity. Home videos show a child of kinetic energy, a tomboy who loved to climb trees, make mud pies, and ride her bike, but who also possessed a natural, effervescent charm. Friends and family described her as sparkly, a child who drew people in with an intuitive warmth. Chapter 2, The Pageant Pathway. The world of child beauty pageants, a subculture Patsy Ramsey knew intimately, became John Benate's second stage. Dressed in miniature replicas of glamorous gowns, her hair coiffed, her lips painted, she performed with a poise that belied her years. She won titles like Little Miss Colorado, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, and most famously, America's Royal missed the videos of her performances to songs like Downtown and One Singular Sensation, would later be replayed endlessly on news networks, their glossy surrealism fueling a nation's macabre fascination. This world is crucial to understanding the case's context. It was a universe of intense parental investment, often criticized for prematurely sexualizing young girls. For the Ramseys, it was presented as a bonding activity, a mother-daughter project, but it created an indelible public image of John Benate that would later complicate the perception of the private child, making her seem simultaneously more vulnerable and, in a tragically twisted way, more of a target. Chapter 3, The Move to Boulder and Cracks in the Facade. In 1991, the Ramseys moved full-time to Boulder, a university town known for its liberal ethos and stunning Flatiron Mountain backdrop. The house at 755 15th Street was a statement, a 7,000-square-foot, rambling home with multiple levels, a maze-like basement, and a distinct, almost Gothic atmosphere. Life appeared idyllic, yet beneath the surface, strains existed. Patsy had undergone a brutal battle with ovarian cancer in 1993-94, a fight that brought her to the brink of death and left the family emotionally and physically scarred. John's business, while successful, was demanding, and the pressure to maintain the image of perfection, for the pageants and for their social standing, was a constant, unspoken presence. As Christmas 1996 approached, the family prepared for a holiday trip to their second home in Charlevoix, with plans to depart on a private plane the morning of the 26th. The house was decorated extravagantly. On Christmas Day, they attended a party at the home of close friends, the Steins. John Benate, by all accounts, was happy, excited for the upcoming journey. That night she was put to bed in her second-floor bedroom, wearing a white long-sleeved knit shirt with a silver star on the chest. She would never wake up. Part II, The Longest Night. Chapter 4, 5:52 a.m. The Discovery. The timeline begins in chaos. Patsy Ramsey's frantic 911 call at 5:52 a.m. on December 26th is the entry point into the nightmare. Her voice, hysterical and breathless, reported her daughter missing. "We have a kidnapping," she screamed. "There's a ransom note." The note, she said, demanded $118,000, a sum oddly specific, matching almost exactly John Ramsey's recent bonus. Officer Rick French was the first to arrive at the sprawling, confusing house. He found Patsy Ramsey on her knees, weeping uncontrollably, her makeup streaked. John Ramsey was packing, distraught. The note was there, laid out on the spiral staircase leading from the foyer to the second floor. It was a novel, 3 pages, handwritten on a legal pad from the house. It began, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction." It rambled, threatening beheading, instructing John to get the money in a brown paper bag, and warning, "Don't try to grow a brain, John." Its tone was at once menacing and bizarrely cinematic, filled with phrases lifted from action movies like *Dirty Harry and Ransom*. Chapter 5, A House Divided, The Initial Search. The Boulder Police Department, inexperienced with crimes of this magnitude, made critical errors in the crucial first hours. The home was not treated as a definitive crime scene. John Ramsey, his friend Fleet White, and Fleet's wife were allowed to move freely through the house. Friends and neighbors began to arrive, contaminating potential evidence. The focus, based on the note, was on an external threat, a kidnapping. No thorough search for John Bennett inside the home was conducted. John Ramsey, following the note's instructions, began making arrangements to gather the ransom money. The FBI was consulted, advising the family to comply and wait for further contact. A strange, suspended agony set in. The house filled with people, but the silence from the supposed kidnappers was deafening. Chapter 6, 1:05 p.m. The basement. As the afternoon wore on with no call, the police presence grew. Detective Linda Arndt, one of the few detectives on scene, felt a growing unease. She later testified to a viscous tension in the house, a sense of something terribly wrong. At her direction, John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White conducted a more thorough search of the house. They started in the basement, a cluttered, unfinished area divided into multiple rooms. In a small, windowless room dubbed the wine cellar, though it held no wine, John Ramsey saw a white blanket. He pulled it back. There was John Bennett lying on her back, a white cord around her neck, her wrists bound above her head with more cord, her mouth covered by duct tape. A terrible, guttural cry erupted from him. He rushed upstairs, clutching his daughter's lifeless body, and laid her on the living room floor. The kidnapping was now a murder. The crime scene, already compromised, was utterly destroyed. Part III, The Evidence and the Theories. Chapter 7, The Autopsy and the Cause of Death. The autopsy, performed by Dr. John Mayer, revealed a horrifying and confusing picture. John Bennett had suffered a severe skull fracture, an 8.5-inch crack from a powerful blow to the head. This injury alone would have rendered her unconscious, likely causing death within an hour. But there was more. Tightly embedded in the skin of her neck was a ligature, a cord attached to a broken paintbrush handle, used as a garrote. The official cause of death was listed as asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. The sequence became the central medical mystery. Was she struck first, then staged with the garrote? Or was she strangled with the head blow a final, violent act? Crucially, there was evidence of a prior, minor vaginal injury, which experts would later debate fiercely. Was it evidence of chronic abuse, or the result of a clumsy, pre-murder assault? The presence of pineapple in her duodenum, undigested, placed her time of death shortly after a snack, a detail that would become pivotal. Chapter 8, The Ransom Note, A Psychological Profile. The note is the case, Rosetta Stone, and it refuses to be deciphered. Handwriting analysts from across the country examined it. While the Boulder District Attorney's Office eventually declared that Patsy Ramsey could not be eliminated as the author, no expert could definitively state she wrote it. The note's peculiarities are legion. Its length, practice drafts were found on Patsy's notepad. Its specific demand matching John's bonus. Its dramatic, movie quote-laden language. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. And its instruction to bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. For intruder theorists, the note is a deliberate, clever red herring, written on site to throw off the investigation. For those who believe in family involvement, It is a failed piece of staging, written in a panicked attempt to direct attention away from the home. Its very strangeness supports both narratives. Asterisk Chapter 9. The Intruder Theory. This theory posits that an unknown assailant or assailants entered the home while the family was at the Christmas party. He hid, perhaps for hours, familiarizing himself with the house. After the family went to sleep, he took John Benate from her bed, possibly subduing her with the head blow in her bedroom or on the stairs. He then took her to the basement, constructed the garage, and committed the murder. He wrote the lengthy ransom note before leaving, either through a basement window with a broken pane, though a spiderweb on the window grate was undisturbed, or another exit. Proponents point to unidentified DNA found in minute amounts on John Benate's underwear and the waistband of her long johns, DNA that did not match any family member. They cite a possible stun gun mark on her body, though this is hotly contested. The lack of definitive proof against the family, and the sheer brutality of the crime as being inconsistent with parental action. This theory often includes suspects ranging from a pedophile who saw her in pageants, to a disgruntled employee of John, to an unknown serial offender. Asterisk Chapter 10. The Family Involvement Theories. This umbrella covers several scenarios, all centered on the belief that the crime was an internal domestic tragedy, covered up to protect someone within the family. The Burke theory, asterisk perhaps the most discussed in recent years. This suggests that John Benate's 9-year-old brother, Burke, struck her in a fit of sibling rage, possibly over the pineapple snack found in the kitchen. The parents, discovering the scene, staged the kidnapping and strangulation to cover for their son, constructing an elaborate and bizarre false narrative to explain the death. Supporters point to Burke's apparent calm in interviews afterward, a 911 call where a child's voice can allegedly be heard in the background, and the juvenile nature of the garrote. A Boy Scout toggle rope knot was used. The Patsy theory, asterisk this suggests Patsy, under immense stress from her cancer recovery, the holidays, and the impending travel, flew into a rage over a bedwetting accident. John Benate was found in long johns that were too large, possibly a change of clothes. She struck John Benate, perhaps against a hard surface, then, believing her dead, staged the scene with John's help to make it look like a kidnapping sexual assault gone wrong. The John theory, asterisk less common but posited by some, is that John Ramsey was responsible, either due to sexual abuse that escalated or in a moment of rage. The cover-up was then orchestrated with Patsy's compliance out of loyalty or fear. Family theory proponents highlight the undisturbed spiderweb on the basement window, the fact that no clear evidence of forced entry was found, the ransom note written on Patsy's pad with her pen, the pineapple bowl on the table with Burke's and Patsy's fingerprints, and what they see as the Ramseys, shifting stories, and lack of full cooperation with police in the early days. Part IV, the unraveling investigation. Asterisk Chapter 11, the media storm and the two boulders. The case instantly became a global media sensation. John Benate's pageant videos provided a lurid, endless loop of footage. The Ramseys' wealth, their attractive appearance, and the sheer grotesquerie of the crime made it irresistible. The family hired a team of high-powered attorneys and a public relations firm, a move that immediately cast suspicion on them in the court of public opinion. Boulder, a town proud of its laid-back, progressive identity, was suddenly the epicenter of a tabloid frenzy. A schism emerged, often described as the two Boulders. The Boulder Police Department, BPD, led by Chief Tom Colby and spearheaded by detectives like Steve Thomas, who became a fierce advocate of the parents, did it theory. grew increasingly convinced of the Ramseys' guilt. The Boulder District Attorney's Office, first under Alex Hunter and later Mary Lacey, was more cautious, concerned about the lack of a smoking gun and the early contamination of evidence. This rift crippled the investigation, leading to distrust, leaks, and a complete breakdown in coordination. Chapter 12. The Grand Jury and the Indictment That Wasn't. In 1998, after a 13-month investigation, a Boulder County grand jury was convened. They heard testimony from hundreds of witnesses, including the Ramseys under limited immunity. In 1999, the grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death and of being accessories to a crime. However, then DA Alex Hunter, believing the evidence was too weak to secure a conviction, refused to sign the indictments. The grand jury's work remained secret for over a decade, a bombshell revelation when it finally emerged in 2013. It confirmed that the official investigative body believed there was probable cause that the parents had contributed to John Benate's death and covered it up, but it left the central mystery untouched. Chapter 13. The Ramseys in the Crosshairs. For John and Patsy Ramsey, life became a defensive siege. They gave carefully managed interviews, most notably to CNN and in a separate tent session with the BPD in 1998. They wrote a book, The Death of Innocence*. They sued media outlets for libel and won several settlements. Their grief was viewed by many as performative, their poise as coldness. Patsy, in particular, was scrutinized for every mannerism, every word. The strain was immeasurable. Patsy died in 2006 after her ovarian cancer returned. John remarried and has largely retreated from public view. Burke Ramsey, after years of silence, gave televised interviews in 2016, defending his family and presenting himself as a normal man forever shadowed by a childhood tragedy. Part V. New Directions and Enduring Mysteries. Chapter 14. The DNA Exoneration and the Foreign Faction. In a stunning reversal in 2008, Boulder DA Mary Lacey, based on newly sensitive DNA testing techniques, issued a formal letter of apology to the Ramsey family. The letter stated that the unknown male DNA found on John Benate's clothing, now a full genetic profile from 2 separate spots, was likely that of her killer, and it exonerated all family members. This was hailed as a vindication by the Ramseys and a validation of the intruder theory. However, the victory was not absolute. Critics, including former BPD investigators, argued the DNA was minuscule, could have been transferred innocently from a factory worker who packaged the underwear, for example, and did not rule out family involvement that didn't involve direct DNA transfer. The touched DNA era had introduced a new, ambiguous variable. Chapter 15. The Case Today and the Unanswered Questions. The John Benate Ramsey case remains officially open but inactive in Boulder. It has been reviewed by outside agencies, including the FBI, but no arrests have ever been made. The unknown DNA profile sits in national databases with no matches. The enduring questions are legion. 1. The pineapple, who gave it to her and when. The bowl on the table suggests she was awake and snacking after returning home, a timeline that contradicts the parents' story of putting her straight to bed. 2. The garrote, why construct such a complex, violent device? Was it part of a sadistic ritual or a panicked attempt to stage a violent kidnapping? 3. The note, who could have written such a lengthy, peculiar document under the extreme stress of either committing a murder or discovering a dead child. 4. The silence, Asterisk if an intruder did it. How did he move so silently in the creaky old house? And how did he know its layout so well? Every piece of evidence is a double-edged sword. The DNA points outward, but the circumstantial evidence points relentlessly inward. The lack of a clear resolution has allowed the case to live on as a cultural obsession, a true crime cottage industry of books, documentaries, and podcasts, each offering a definitive theory that the next one dismantles. Epilogue, the unfinished lullaby. JonBenét Ramsey would be in her 30s today. Perhaps she would have left the pageant world behind, maybe become a teacher, an artist, a mother. We will never know. Her story is frozen at age 6, a snapshot of a child caught between the glittering world her parents built and the unimaginable darkness that found her within its walls. The house on 15th Street has been sold and remodeled, the spiral staircase gone, the basement reconfigured, as if to physically erase the memory. But the case cannot be remodeled. It stands as a monument to investigative failure, to the corrosive power of media, to the human need for narrative in the face of senseless horror, and to the terrifying possibility that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. The true legacy of JonBenét Ramsey may not be the answer to whodunit, but the uncomfortable questions her death forces us to ask about ourselves, about our fascination with violence and innocence, our rush to judgment, our trust in institutions, and the fragile, terrifying privacy of family life. Her lullaby remains unfinished, its final notes lost in the echo between a basement wall and a nation's continent.